More than 2 million years ago, under the burning African sun, a wild world stretched as far as the eye could see. There were no cities, no metal, no civilization. Only dry grass, thorn bushes, winding rivers, and endless herds of animals. On this harsh land, every day was a battle for survival. The strong devoured the weak. The predators ruled. And it was here that Homo habilis, the first of our ancestors to earn the name the handyman, appeared. If you had lived at that time, you would have quickly realized you were not at the top of the food chain. On the contrary, you were a fragile creature, barely 4 feet tall, weighing less than 40 kilograms. Against the saber-toothed cat with fangs as long as daggers, against the giant hyena capable of crushing bones, Homo habilis looked like a lost child wandering in a land of monsters. They had no speed to outrun the cheetah, no claws to fight off the crocodile lurking in the river. Not even a roar to scare enemies away. So how did they survive? The answer lay in 2 things: a growing brain and a pair of clever hands. The brain of Homo habilis was only about 600 to 700 cubic centimeters, smaller than modern humans, but larger than that of their ancestors, Australopithecus. It was not a brain that could create art or philosophy, but it was enough to spark an idea. Use a stone instead of a fang, a stick instead of a claw. Their hands, with opposable thumbs, became the most important weapon they had. Every morning on the savanna, when the sunrise painted the grasslands red, Homo habilis faced constant fear. The rustle in the tall grass might mean a hyena was stalking. A ripple in the river could be a crocodile's open jaws. A distant roar was enough to shake the entire group with dread. In this world, survival was not simply about finding food. It was about avoiding death in every breath. Yet in this fear-filled world, Homo habilis began to change the game. Instead of fleeing aimlessly, they learned to observe. A sharp rock could cut flesh faster than teeth. A sturdy branch could serve as a defensive club. They began to see the world not just as prey, but as a toolkit. For the first time, these small, trembling beings stepped out of the shadows of predators, not with strength, but with crude intelligence. Their brains, though small, ignited a spark of innovation. In a land where every other creature relied on tooth and claw, Homo habilis relied on ideas. That was the first step in the human survival story. But cleverness did not guarantee tomorrow. Many groups of Homo habilis vanished without trace, torn apart on the savanna or starving in the dry season. At dawn, you and your group forage for berries, dig roots, flip stones for insects. Sometimes you stumble upon the remains of an antelope, abandoned after lions had their feast the night before. Without tools, you would get nothing but rotten scraps. But with a sharpened stone, you could slice open the skin, pull out edible flesh, or break open bones to suck out the marrow, fatty, nutrient-rich, and life-saving. In a world where calories were rare, every drop of marrow could mean survival. This was the moment Homo habilis stepped into a new age, feeding with tools. And from there, evolution accelerated. Meat and marrow fueled their brains, making them slightly bigger. Bigger brains created slightly better tools. This feedback loop, food and tool, brain and survival, became the engine of human evolution. For now, though, Chapter 1 leaves us with a simple image. A small band of Homo habilis, trembling in the grasslands, surrounded by predators larger and stronger. They do not know if tomorrow will come, but they have their hands, they have their minds, and most importantly, they have the will to survive. In that fragile space between life and death, the first page of the human story was written. The story of Homo habilis cannot be told without focusing on their most remarkable feature, the hands. Evolution had quietly shaped them into something extraordinary. Unlike the curled fingers of apes built for climbing trees, habilis hands were broader, stronger, with a thumb set apart to pinch, grip, and press. These were not just hands made to hold on. These were hands made to create. On the grasslands of East Africa, every survival advantage was measured in moments. A lion's charge was over in seconds. A crocodile's strike from the riverbank gave no warning. But in those same fleeting moments, Homo habilis learned to pick up a rock and turn it into something sharper, deadlier, more useful than it had been before. A single strike of stone against stone could break off a flake with a razor's edge. In their hands, the earth itself became a weapon. Imagine the first time it happened. One individual, maybe desperate with hunger, lifted a rock and smashed it down on another. The sound cracked across the savanna. When the dust cleared, a jagged edge glittered in the sunlight. They touched it. It sliced the skin of their palm. That sting of pain carried a revelation. This sharp edge could cut through things that teeth could not. It was a moment as small as a flake of stone and as vast as the beginning of technology. Archaeologists would later call these artifacts the Oldowan tools, the first known technology of humankind. Pound roots into something edible. Suddenly, food that had once been inaccessible became theirs, and with every cut of stone, survival grew easier. Not safe, never safe, but just enough. Enough to live through another day. Enough to give their offspring a chance. Enough to keep the fragile spark of their kind alive. But tools did more than fill their stomachs. They transformed the way Homo habilis interacted with the world. For the first time, they were not simply reacting to nature, they were reshaping it. The carcass of an antelope was no longer the sole prize of the predator that killed it. It was now a battlefield of opportunity. With sharp flakes and strong hands, habilis groups could sneak in after the lions had gone, tearing through hide and bone, feasting on what was left. In this way, they became opportunists, scavengers at first, but smarter scavengers than any other species alive. It is easy to underestimate how radical this change was. Every animal around Homo habilis was bound by its biology. The cheetah could only use speed. The hyena could only use its jaws. But habilis could invent. The moment they struck stone against stone, they stepped beyond the limits of flesh. They had opened the door to a new way of living, not as the strongest, not as the fastest, but as the most adaptable. Their hands carried another gift, cooperation. Making and using tools demanded observation, learning, and teaching. A child watching an elder strike stone on stone would mimic the movement, fumbling at first, but slowly mastering the technique. Skills were passed down not by instinct alone, but by demonstration. And with that, culture, primitive, fragile, but real, was born. The survival of Homo habilis was not the tale of lone heroes. It was the story of groups, of families clinging together against the dark. Around a stream or beneath a grove of trees, they huddled close. They shared scraps of meat sliced with stone flakes, passed marrow-filled bones from one hand to another, and taught their young the gestures that meant danger, safety, food. In those circles of survival, something more than hunger was at work. The first glimmers of community were beginning to shine. Yet even with tools and teamwork, life was brutal. For every carcass successfully scavenged, there was another day of failure. For every group that learned to cut bones, another group was torn apart by predators. Death stalked them constantly. The grasslands gave no mercy. But the fact that any of them survived at all is proof of the resilience written into their very bones. This was the dawn of the human survival story. Fragile bodies, trembling hands, but a determination to endure. In those chipped stones and scarred fingers lay the first chapter of technology, legacy of Homo Habilis. Every tool we have ever created, swords, plows, machines, even spacecraft, traces its lineage back to a trembling hand that once struck stone against stone and dared to imagine a sharper edge. The savanna still burned hot. Predators still prowled. Life for Homo habilis remained short and brutal. But for the first time in history, survival no longer depended solely on muscle or fang. It depended on the mind and the hand, working together. That union, born in desperation more than 2 million years ago, was the seed from which humanity would grow. For Homo habilis, survival was always a gamble played on the edge of hunger. The African savanna was rich with life, zebras, wildebeest, antelope, elephants. But it was also ruled by predators that were faster, stronger, and far more dangerous. Lions hunted in prides, leopards struck from trees, hyenas prowled in relentless packs. To be small and weak in such a world meant that food was never guaranteed. Berries and roots offered some sustenance, but they were seasonal and often scarce. In the long dry months, plants withered and fruits disappeared. Insects and small lizards could be caught, but they offered little energy. The most precious food of all, meat, fat, and marrow, lay locked inside the bodies of large animals. Yet for Homo habilis, hunting those animals was almost impossible. They lacked the speed to chase, the strength to bring down prey, and the claws or teeth to finish the kill. So they became scavengers, shadowing the true hunters of the plains. A pride of lions might bring down a zebra. Vultures circling overhead announced the kill to every eye watching the skies. Hyenas would gather, snarling and laughing, tearing at the carcass. Only when the chaos settled, when the predators had eaten their fill, did Homo habilis creep closer. It was a dangerous strategy. The smell of blood carried for miles, drawing not only scavengers but also rivals. If they moved too soon, lions could return and strike them down. If they waited too long, hyenas might strip the bones bare. Every approach to a carcass was a test of nerve and timing. But when they succeeded, the reward was immense. With sharp-edged flakes of stone, they could slice through tough hides that even the teeth of scavenging jackals could not breach. They could cut away strips of meat still clinging to bones, tendon by tendon. Most importantly, they could smash open bones with hammerstones, releasing the rich marrow inside. That marrow, thick, fatty, and loaded with calories, was like liquid fire for their growing brains. Modern science shows that this change in diet was critical. Meat and marrow provided concentrated energy that plant food could never match. For the first time, Homo habilis could for signs of predators. Another smashes a leg bone against a stone, splintering it open. Children squeal softly as the marrow drips out, warm and oily into waiting hands. They pass it around, licking their fingers, smearing their faces with grease. For a moment, hunger is silenced. For a moment, they are safe. But the danger never vanished. Vultures screeched overhead. Hyenas circled in the distance, eyes glowing in the dusk. Any second could bring disaster. The meal was not a celebration, but a race, a desperate scramble to eat before death came stalking again. In this world, food and fear were inseparable. It was a brutal way to live, yet it was also ingenious. By daring to take risks, Homo habilis tapped into resources no other creature could access. They were not hunters, not yet, but they were innovators. Their survival story was written not by strength, but by courage and cleverness in the face of hunger. And as they ate, their culture deepened. Sharing food was not optional, it was essential. A marrow-filled bone was too heavy for one to carry alone. Strips of meat spoiled quickly in the heat. The only way forward was together. In this way, food became more than fuel. It became the glue of community. Around each scavenged carcass, they learned that survival was strongest when it was shared. In the long run, this fragile balance between hunger and risk gave Homo habilis a foothold. They could not yet master fire. They could not yet hunt with skill. But they had found a way to endure, meal by risky meal. And from those stolen feasts on the savanna, the roots of humanity's appetite for survival were laid down. When Homo habilis gathered around a carcass, the scene was more than survival. It was the beginning of something deeper, a ritual of necessity that laid the first stones of human community. For most animals, eating is solitary or competitive. Hyenas fight each other, teeth snapping as they tear at the same carcass. Lions squabble even within their own pride, each trying to secure the best cut of meat. But Homo habilis began to behave differently. The kill was not owned by one individual. It was shared, because without sharing there was no survival. A single habilis, even armed with sharp stone flakes, could not hope to protect food from predators or rivals. But together, a group could watch, warn, and eat in frantic coordination. One smashed the bones, another sliced away tendons, while others kept their eyes fixed on the tall grass. Even children had their roles, learning to mimic the motions of cutting or carrying scraps back to camp. It was a dance of survival, choreographed by hunger and held together by trust. That act of evidence of cut marks on fossilized bones that tell this story. Scratches left by stone flakes reveal that habilis groups systematically butchered carcasses, not in chaos, but in method. Each mark whispers of cooperation, of hands working side by side in the struggle against hunger. These silent traces show us that food was not just eaten, but managed, shared, and remembered. Imagine the end of such a meal. The bones lie shattered, the hide torn open, scraps scattered in the dust. Grease smears the hands and faces of the group. The air smells of iron and earth. The sun sinks low, and shadows creep across the grassland. They retreat to a safer place, perhaps a cluster of rocks or the low shelter of trees. There, in the cooling twilight, they huddle close. Bellies are full, if only for tonight. Children drowse against their mothers' sides. Elders keep watch with stone flakes still clutched in their hands. Around them, the savanna hums with the calls of predators rising for the night. It was never safety they gained, only a fragile pause in danger. But in those pauses, they discovered something extraordinary: belonging. They were no longer just individuals, scavenging in desperation. They were groups bound by the rhythm of meals, by the sharing of risk and reward. That bond was as nourishing as the marrow itself. This sharing also sowed the seeds of fairness, of memory, of responsibility. Who gave food and who withheld it was not forgotten. A generous act could strengthen a reputation while selfishness might weaken trust. In this way, even without language, rules began to form, primitive, unspoken laws that governed life and death. Of 2015, it is tempting to think of Homo habilis only as crude creatures scraping by. But in truth, they were architects of something larger. Every shared meal was a lesson passed down to the young. Watch out for each other. Divide the food. Protect the group. These lessons became culture, fragile but enduring, etched not in books, but in the habits of survival. And in those habits, the future was already unfolding. The instinct to gather and share would one day lead to fire circles, villages, and feasts. The trust built over marrow bones would one day shape trade, law, and kinship. The fragile bonds of Homo habilis were the first threads of the vast human web of society. In the savanna, surrounded by predators and shadowed by extinction, they found strength not in muscle, not in claws, but in each other. And that, perhaps, lions prowled silently, hyenas howled in packs, and leopards slunk low to the ground. Even the riverbanks became dangerous, with crocodiles lurking just beyond sight. Darkness stripped away what little safety daylight offered. For habilis, each night was a question. Would they see the sunrise again? And then, sometimes, the sky would split with fire. Lightning would stab the horizon, igniting a patch of dry grass. Flames roared, devouring the land, painting the night with an orange glow. Most animals fled in panic, driven by instinct to escape the heat and smoke. But Homo habilis did not only run. They watched, they waited, and they learned. Fire was not theirs to command, not yet, but it was something they could use. A smoldering log left after a lightning storm became a tool. The glow of flame kept prowling predators at bay, giving them a fragile circle of safety. The heat of embers gave warmth against the cold night air. Even the smoke, acrid and sharp, seemed to confuse the noses of beasts that hunted by scent. Imagine the awe they must have felt, staring into flames for the first time. The crackle and hiss, the shifting colors, the warmth radiating into shivering skin. It was unlike anything else in the world. Fire was alive, both feared and desired. It could kill, but it could also protect. To sit near fire was to taste a power greater than any tooth or claw. For Homo habilis, fire was still a stranger. They could not yet kindle it at will. They could only seize it from nature's hands, carrying glowing sticks back to their shelters, protecting them until the flames died. Yet even this small mastery changed everything. Nights became less terrifying. Meals could be eaten with predators held at a cautious distance. Families huddled not only for warmth, but for comfort in the fire's glow. There is no direct evidence that Homo habilis controlled fire fully, but many anthropologists believe they at least knew how to exploit it when it appeared. Stone tools and scorched bones found in ancient campsites suggest that fire was already beginning to weave its way into the survival story of early humans. The firelight also gave something else: time. Before flames, darkness forced them into silence and fear, waiting for dawn. With flames flickering, the night opened a new kind of space. They could sit together, watch the sparks dance, and communicate in grunts and gestures without being swallowed by fear. Around those first fires, the seeds of storytelling may have been planted, the instinct to gather, to remember, to pass down. But fire was never guaranteed. A rainstorm could snuff it out. A forgotten ember could fade into ash. Each encounter with fire was temporary, fragile, precious. And in that fragility, Homo habilis learned something crucial. Survival was not of the savanna. Fire was not a gift freely given. It was a prize, rare and dangerous, but worth every risk. When flames lit the night, Homo Habilis found a glimpse of power. For the first time, they could push back against the darkness, and in that glowing circle of safety, humanity's path forward began to shine. For Homo Habilis, the discovery of fire was not just about survival, it was about transformation. A carcass could fill the belly, a tool could cut through bone, but fire touched something deeper. It did not only protect their bodies, it began to shape their minds. Imagine a small band of Homo Habilis huddled around a glowing ember carried back from a lightning-struck tree. The night air is cold, heavy with the smell of smoke. Beyond the circle of light, the grass whispers with hidden movement. Predators still prowl. But here, within the ring of flame, there is a pause. For the first time in countless generations, darkness does not mean helplessness. The circle of fire became a circle of belonging. No other animal on the savanna gathered this way. Hyenas huddled for warmth but did not share food. Baboons groomed one another but scattered at the first sign of danger. Only Homo Habilis sat together in deliberate stillness, drawn not by instinct alone but by choice, by the warmth, the safety, and the mystery of fire. Around these flames a new rhythm of life began to emerge. The day was for foraging, for watching the skies and stalking predators to steal scraps of meat. But the night, lit by fire, became something else. It became a time to rest, to heal wounds, to share marrow bones and strip sinews in relative safety. It became a time when mothers soothed their children not with fear but with warmth. And perhaps, in halting grunts and gestures, the first stories were told. Accounts of the day's dangers, warnings of predators, or memories of places where food could be found. Even without language, fire created conversation. The flicker of flames illuminated faces, made gestures clearer, gave shadows to movement. Communication was no longer only about urgent survival cries. It became about learning, remembering, bonding. Slowly, the bonds of family deepened into the bonds of community. The firelight also changed the way they saw themselves. In the dark, they were prey. In the firelight, they were something more. The glow reflected in their eyes made them feel larger, more powerful, as if the flame had given them part of its spirit. To predators watching from the grass, the fire was a barrier, a symbol that this fragile creature was not entirely helpless. For the first time, Homo Habilis did not simply hide from the night. They pushed it back. This fragile mastery also brought new opportunities. Fire hardened wooden sticks into stronger spears and digging tools. Fire frightened at new possibilities. Fire was no longer just an accident of nature. It was becoming a tool, one more step in the growing arsenal of human survival. But perhaps the greatest gift of fire was time. Before fire, the day ended with the sun. Darkness forced them into silence, into waiting, into fear. With fire, the night stretched further. There were hours now for grooming, for teaching, for shaping tools in the glow of embers. Those extra hours became the cradle of culture, an expansion of the human world beyond the simple rhythm of daylight. We cannot know what thoughts flickered in their minds as they stared into the flames, but we can guess. Curiosity, wonder, fear, awe, feelings that still stir in us when we watch a campfire at night. In the crackle of burning wood, they may have heard the first echoes of imagination. In the sparks flying upward, they may have seen the beginning of dreams. And so, the circle of fire was not just a shelter against the night. It was the first hearth, the first home, a place where survival turned into society, where hunger turned into sharing, where fear turned into story. Homo Habilis could not yet kindle fire at will. Their flames died often, leaving them once more in the dark. But the memory of those nights around fire lived on. Each time lightning split the sky, each time flames rose from the grass, they returned to the lesson. Fire meant life. Fire meant us. In the glow of those ancient flames, the survival story of humanity deepened. We were no longer just clever scavengers with stone flakes. We had begun to gather, to bond, to imagine, bound together by the light of fire in the endless dark. For countless generations, Homo habilis survived by scavenging, waiting for predators to finish their feasts, then daring to snatch what scraps remained. But scavenging was never enough. The savanna was vast, the predators many, and competition fierce. Hunger lingered, gnawing at their bellies, whispering that scraps alone would not sustain them forever. At some point, necessity pushed them to take a risk greater than ever before: the risk of hunting. Of course, Homo habilis was not built like a predator. They had no sharp claws, no ripping fangs, no sprinting speed. To hunt the great beasts of the savanna, zebras, wildebeests, or buffalo, was impossible. But the world was not only filled with giants, it was also alive with smaller creatures: hares darting between shrubs, lizards basking on warm stones, young gazelles straying too far from the herd. These became the first targets of habilis hunters. The weapons were crude: sticks sharpened in fire, stones thrown by hand, and flakes used as knives. The hunts were the tall grass, eyes fixed on a grazing antelope calf. One edges forward, stone in hand. Another circles behind. At a signal, perhaps a grunt, perhaps just a glance, they spring. The animal bolts, but a stone strikes its flank. A stick lashes out. The calf stumbles. In the chaos, sharp flakes cut deep, blood spills. The hunters seize their chance, and for the first time, the kill is theirs. The scene is messy, frantic, and dangerous. The cries of the dying animal echo across the savanna, carrying a warning to predators. The group must work quickly, slicing flesh, sharing strips of meat, breaking bones for marrow. Every second counts. Yet in this scramble lies triumph. For the first time, they have not waited for lions or hyenas. They have taken life with their own hands. This new boldness came with risks. Predators were drawn to the scent of blood. A careless hunt could bring lions crashing through the grass, scattering the band, and leaving only death in their wake. But even failed hunts taught lessons. Each mistake carved knowledge into their memory: where to strike, when to attack, how to watch the wind so their scent did not give them away. Slowly, painfully, Homo habilis began to transform from scavengers into hunters, and with this transformation came a deeper change in their society. Hunting required cooperation beyond anything scavenging demanded. One alone could not trap an animal. One alone could not stand watch while others cut meat. To succeed, they had to act as one. The meal that followed a successful hunt was different too. Scavenged scraps often left resentment. Too little food to go around, too many hungry mouths. But a kill, even a small one, meant abundance, if only for a moment. Around the carcass, the group did not just eat, they celebrated. Grunts echoed louder, bodies moved closer, food passed more freely. Each hunt was not only a victory over hunger, but a victory over fear. In the marrow-slick hands of Homo habilis, survival was becoming something more than chance. It was becoming choice. By daring to hunt, they expanded their role in the savanna. They were no longer shadows trailing behind lions. They were stepping into the light of predators themselves, still fragile, still clumsy, but bold enough to take what they needed. Every thrown stone, every sharpened stick, every hunt, successful or failed, pushed them closer to what we would one day call humanity. And though their tools were crude and their victories small, the principle was enormous. Survival was no longer only about waiting. It was about action. A kill was never just food. For Homo Habilis, excitement. The old ones grunt approval. Everyone gathers quickly, drawn by the smell of fresh meat. For the first time, they are not beggars at nature's table. They have taken their meal by force of will and crude invention. And that changes everything. The butchering begins. Stone flakes slice through hide and sinew. Bones are cracked open with hammerstones, releasing marrow that drips thick and oily onto waiting hands. Flesh is divided, passed from one to another. It is not equal. Dominant individuals take the largest cuts, the choicest marrow. But it is shared. No one is left entirely empty-handed. Even the smallest child gnaws on a tendon or sucks grease from a broken bone. This act of sharing, however uneven, is revolutionary. It forges bonds that go beyond family ties. A hunter who gives food earns trust. One who hoards risks anger. Memory begins to matter. Who shared, who withheld, these things linger in the minds of the group. In these unspoken judgments lie the seeds of morality, the earliest rules of fairness that will one day shape all human societies. Around the kill, roles are reinforced. The strong are protectors, guarding the meal from scavengers that might rush in. The skilled are cutters, slicing the best portions quickly. The watchful keep their eyes on the grass, alert for the return of predators. Even the young have a place, carrying scraps back, imitating the motions of cutting, learning through play. A hunt is not just about food. It is a lesson, a ritual, a rehearsal for the future. It is also a moment of rare abundance. Hunger had been their constant companion, gnawing and relentless. But with a kill, for a few hours, that hunger was silenced. In those hours, the group relaxed, pressed closer together, made louder sounds. Grunts and gestures became more expressive, as if food loosened the tongue as well as the belly. Perhaps the first playful shouts echoed then, the beginnings of laughter born from relief. The hunt also changed how they saw the world around them. Carcasses were no longer just gifts of chance. They were goals to be pursued. The savanna, once only a place of danger and scraps, became a place of opportunity. Each animal they spotted was no longer just a threat, but also a possibility. The horizon itself grew wider, filled with choices. Of course, not every hunt ended in triumph. Failure was constant, sometimes deadly. A misstep could scatter the group and leave one vulnerable to predators. Tables, we celebrate with feasts. We build trust through meals. That instinct began here, in the trembling hands of Homo Habilis passing marrow and meat beneath the savanna sky. The predators still prowled. The nights were still long, and hunger always returned. But in those fleeting moments of triumph, firelight on their faces and meat in their hands, Homo Habilis discovered that survival was not only about taking life. It was about sharing it. And in that act, they began the long journey toward becoming human. On the savanna, silence could mean death. A rustle in the grass, a shadow at the edge of sight. These were warnings too important to ignore. For Homo habilis, survival depended not only on what they could do with their hands, but on how they could reach each other's minds. Yet they had no language, not as we know it. No words, no sentences, no names. What they had instead was the fragile beginning of communication. Sounds, gestures, expressions, signals born of necessity. Imagine a small band moving across the grasslands. At the front, one suddenly stiffens. His head jerks toward a movement in the distance. Instead of running, he lets out a sharp grunt. The sound is urgent, different from the low murmurs of comfort or the growls of warning at night. Instantly, the group freezes. Eyes follow the gesture of his arm pointing toward the brush. A leopard waits there, crouched low, ready to spring. Because of that grunt, because of that gesture, the group survives. This is the dawn of language, not words carved in air, but meaning carried in sound and movement. Each cry had its purpose. A high, shrill call to warn of predators, a low rumble to signal food found nearby. Repeated grunts to gather others close. Over time, these sounds became recognizable, consistent, passed from parent to child, just as tools were. A vocabulary of survival, crude but powerful. Gestures played their part too. A hand raised meant stop. A finger pointing meant look. A rock held up might mean danger, or food, or a tool worth keeping. Expressions, the widening of eyes, the baring of teeth, the tilt of the head, added nuance. Slowly, Homo habilis built a system of meaning stitched together from body and voice. These signals were not perfect. Misunderstandings were common. A cry meant to warn might spark panic instead. A gesture could be missed in the chaos of a hunt. Yet even with flaws, this primitive communication was revolutionary. It allowed them to coordinate in ways no other creature could. Lions roared to intimidate. Hyenas laughed to confuse. But Homo habilis spoke to cooperate. Around the fire, these signals expanded. No longer bound only to danger, they became tools for memory. A gesture toward a scar, a grunt repeated with emphasis, a hand motioning east, all could tell the story of a hunt or mark the path to water. In the firelight, shadows played across faces, making gestures sharper, more dramatic. Perhaps in these moments, the first storytelling began. Crude reenactments of the day, warnings for tomorrow, memories for the young. This was not language as we know it. There were no words for yesterday, or hope, or sky. But there were beginnings, calls for food, signals for danger, sounds of comfort and belonging. The bridge between thought and expression had been laid, fragile and narrow, but strong enough to carry the weight of survival. We may never know exactly how these first voices sounded, but in our own laughter, in the cries of our children, in the instinct to point and signal without words, we carry echoes of Homo habilis. Their need to speak, to reach one another across the void of fear, was the first spark of a fire that would one day ignite into full human language. And so, in the cries that split the savanna night, in the gestures caught in firelight, in the shared sounds of warning and joy, Homo habilis took another step forward. The world was still hostile, the predators still near. But for the first time, Their voices began to weave survival into something more. Connection. Communication for Homo habilis did not stop with warning cries or urgent grunts. Over time, their sounds grew more varied, their gestures more deliberate, their meanings more precise. What began as survival signals evolved into something richer, a proto-language, crude but powerful, a bridge between thought and action that reshaped the way they lived together. Consider a hunt. One individual creeps through the grass, eyes locked on a small antelope. A sharp grunt signals another to circle left. A wave of the hand draws the group closer. A hiss-like sound warns the young ones to stay behind. No words, but meaning flows. They coordinate, surround, and strike. What once would have been chaos becomes strategy, stitched together by shared signals. Success becomes more frequent, and with each success, the sounds themselves become more ingrained. This proto-language also carried memory. After the hunt, when the group sat by the firelight, the hunters reenacted what had happened. Arms gestured the leap of the antelope, voices mimicked the call of alarm, hands habilis to act not only on what they saw, but on what they remembered. The savanna was no longer just a landscape. It became a map of experiences, passed through proto-language from one mind to another. Emotions, too, found their voice. Comforting murmurs soothed children. Sharp barks disciplined the reckless. Rhythmic hums calmed the group in the dark. Over time, these sounds shaped bonds of affection, loyalty, and belonging. A shared sound could mean, stay close. Another could mean, I am here. In the emptiness of the night, these voices became lifelines. Anthropologists believe that the brains of Homo habilis, though smaller than ours, were already showing adaptations for complex communication. Their vocal tracts could shape a variety of sounds. Their hands, freed by upright walking, could gesture and point. Together, these tools gave them an edge no other creature had: the ability to share ideas, however crude. What is striking is that this proto-language was not just practical, it was cultural. Around the fire, gestures may have turned into games, sounds into playful exchanges, rhythms into proto-songs. A child imitating the grunt of a predator might draw laughter. A repeated chant might bond the group, echoing in the night like the heartbeat of a tribe. In these small acts lay the seeds of music, ritual, and imagination. Language, in its infancy, changed the very nature of survival. It allowed them to plan, to coordinate, to remember, and to dream. It gave them a shared reality, a common ground that bound them together more tightly than hunger or fear alone ever could. With each grunt, each gesture, each shared story, Homo habilis took another step toward humanity. We are the heirs of that first proto-language. Our words, our songs, our laughter, all trace back to those crude signals on the savanna. When we speak, when we tell stories, when we sing by firelight, we echo Homo habilis, who first dared to reach across the silence and make meaning with sound. The predators still prowled, the nights were still long, and hunger always returned. But with proto-language, Homo habilis gained something predators never could: the ability to share minds. And in that fragile web of sound and gesture, the roots of human culture began to grow. On the African savanna, danger did not always come with teeth and claws. Some enemies struck without warning, invisible yet merciless. For Homo habilis, predators were terrifying, but at least they could be seen, smelled, or heard. Far deadlier were the forces of nature itself: drought, storms, floods, disease. These enemies could not be fought with stone flakes or sharpened sticks. They had to be endured. Drought was the most relentless. For months, the sky carcasses they once relied on grew fewer as herds wandered far in search of water. Starvation stalked them silently, and many bands vanished during these dry seasons, their bones left scattered under the unyielding sun. Then came the opposite extreme, sudden floods. When the rains finally broke, they did not always return gently. Thunder split the air, rivers overflowed, and torrents swept across the land. For fragile shelters, hastily built near streams, this was devastation. Fires carried from lightning strikes were drowned, leaving groups in cold darkness. Food supplies washed away. Even the ground itself could turn to mire, trapping the unwary. Disease, too, was an unseen killer. Without understanding, Homo habilis watched their companions weaken and die. A wound infected after a hunt, a stomach illness from rotten meat, parasites from the water. All were deadly. Unlike predators, which killed one or two at a time, sickness could sweep through entire bands, leaving only silence behind. For them, every day alive was a victory against enemies they could not name. Yet in the face of these trials, Homo habilis showed their greatest strength: adaptability. They could not command the rains, but they could move. Bands wandered further, chasing the paths of herds, seeking new waterholes, remembering routes carved into their minds by generations. Migration became survival, and with it came resilience. They could not cure disease, but they could learn. Rotten meat was avoided after too many deaths. Bitter plants were spat out, while others chewed cautiously, sometimes soothed a sick stomach. Over time, trial and error etched knowledge into their instincts. Though crude, this was the beginning of medicine, lessons taught not by science, but by suffering. These invisible enemies also forged cooperation. In drought, sharing water mattered more than ever. In floods, carrying the young to higher ground saved lives. When sickness struck, groups learned to care for the weak, even if only with touch or presence. Such acts may seem small, but they carried a profound truth. Survival was not only about the strongest. It was about the group, enduring together. The predators of the night had always been feared, their glowing eyes haunting the darkness. But it was these unseen forces, heat, hunger, disease, that truly tested Homo habilis. Against them, claws and courage meant nothing. Only adaptability, memory, and unity gave them a chance. And so, slowly, painfully, Homo habilis learned to bend with the world rather than break against it. They became wanderers, opportunists, survivors not because they conquered nature, but because they endured it. In that endurance lay the secret of humanity, the ability to face invisible enemies and still find a way to live. Fruit trees bore no yield, and roots withered in the soil. They did not give up. They adapted. Unlike predators bound to their prey, Homo habilis could eat many things. Their diet stretched like their imagination: berries, nuts, roots, insects, small animals, eggs stolen from nests, marrow sucked from cracked bones. What others ignored or could not reach, they turned into food. Every patch of land was a puzzle, and their stomachs were the solution. Picture a dry season. The river has shrunk to a trickle. The grasses stand brittle and brown. Large carcasses are rare, for herds have vanished to distant lands. In such times, Homo habilis turned to smaller prey, scrabbling after lizards, chasing hares, overturning logs for beetles and grubs. They dug for roots, their crude tools prying into the hard ground. They climbed low branches for bird eggs, cracked open nuts with hammerstones, sucked the sweetness from wild honey when they dared to brave a hive. Hunger was never silenced, but it was kept at bay through ingenuity. This diversity of diet was more than survival. It was resilience. Predators starved when their prey fled, but Homo habilis endured, piecing together meals from dozens of sources. In this way, they became the ultimate opportunists. Where others saw famine, they saw challenge. Where others died, they adapted. It was not always pleasant. Many foods were bitter, tough, or foul-tasting. Some made them sick, and trial and error left scars of memory on their minds. But over time, patterns emerged. Certain roots filled bellies without harm. Certain berries always spelled danger. This knowledge spread through the band, shared not in words but in gestures, warnings, and lessons shown to children. Each mistake carved wisdom into the group, making the next generation stronger. Their flexible diet also reshaped their tools. Stones once used only for cutting meat found new uses in cracking nuts, pounding roots, or scraping bark. A stick sharpened by fire could dig deeper for tubers or spear fish in shallow streams. Every adaptation of appetite led to an adaptation of technology, and each tool told the story of hunger turned into innovation. Around the fire, the scraps of these meals became lessons. Children were shown how to split open bones, how to suck marrow from the hollow center. They were taught which insects to eat raw, which needed to be roasted in flame to make them safe. In this way, survival knowledge became tradition, etched not on stone tablets, but in the habits of daily life. This flexibility was the quiet triumph of Homo habilis. They could not control the weather. They could not fight disease. They could not defeat predators outright. But they could bend with every hardship, shaping their appetite to fit the world's offerings. Their survival was not about tundras, forests, and cities, because our ancestors learned long ago to eat whatever the land provided. It began here, with Homo habilis, who looked at a world of scarcity and saw a feast of possibilities. The predators still prowled, the climate still shifted, but Homo habilis endured. Their stomachs were not choosy, and their minds were not fixed. In this, they discovered the truth that would carry humanity forward. To survive, you must adapt, not just in body, but in every choice you make, even in the food you eat. The savanna was a place of giants. Herds of wildebeest thundered across the plains. Giraffes browsed on tall trees. Elephants shook the earth as they moved. For a small, fragile creature like Homo habilis, these animals were untouchable. But there were other opportunities, smaller, swifter prey that could be taken not by strength alone, but by strategy. And strategy required cooperation. For generations, Homo habilis had scavenged and later hunted small animals with crude tools. But soon, they began to discover that a group working together could do what no individual ever could. Cooperation was not just helpful, it was survival. Imagine a dry morning. The grass whispers with the breeze. A hare darts from its burrow. Instantly, the band of Homo habilis springs into motion. One charges from the front, another circles wide to cut off escape. A third, waiting behind, raises a stone. The hare zigzags wildly, but the coordinated movement narrows its options. Finally, cornered, it is struck down. The kill is small, barely enough to feed them all, but the triumph is immense. For once, hunger is answered not by luck, but by teamwork. These early hunts were clumsy and often failed. Prey escaped more often than not. But even failure carried lessons. The group learned to move silently, to anticipate one another's actions, to wait for the right moment. Grunts and gestures sharpened into signals. Over time, hunts became more than chaos. They became practice, strategy, rehearsal for survival. The tools of these hunts were simple: sharpened sticks hardened by fire, stones hurled with surprising force, flakes of stone for butchering. Yet in the hands of a group they were enough. The prey was rarely large, but lizards, hares, and young antelopes fell into their grasp. Each kill carried more than meat. It carried proof that together they were stronger than their fear. Cooperation also reshaped their social bonds. To hunt together required trust. One who fled too soon could doom the hunt. One who failed to warn of danger could cost lives. Slowly, unspoken rules emerged. Courage was remembered. Cowardice was not forgotten. Trust became currency, and reputation became survival. The sharing of the kill was about reinforcing loyalty, teaching the young, proving that the group mattered more than the individual. Modern humans still carry echoes of this. Our ancestors gathered around hunts, and we gather today around tables. We celebrate victories with meals, build friendships through shared food, and trust those who feed us. That instinct began here, when Homo habilis first hunted, not as scattered individuals, but as a unit bound by trust. The cooperative hunt also sharpened their minds. Planning an ambush required foresight. Flanking prey demanded coordination. Waiting for the right moment demanded patience. These mental skills, rehearsed again and again, slowly shaped their brains into something greater. Hunting was not just about meat. It was about thinking ahead. The predators of the savanna were still stronger, faster, deadlier. But Homo habilis had discovered something new: unity. A lone lion was powerful, but a pride was unstoppable. In the same way, a lone habilis was weak, but a band working together could carve out its own place in the food chain. This shift marked a turning point in the human story. For the first time, survival was no longer a solitary struggle. It was a collective endeavor. And from this fragile beginning, the blueprint of all human cooperation, villages, tribes, nations, was born in the blood and breath of the hunt. The kill itself was only half the story. For Homo habilis, the true power of the cooperative hunt lived in what came after: the gathering, the sharing, and the pride that bound the group together. A successful hunt was not simply meat for the belly. It was meaning for the mind. Picture the return of the hunters. They carry a carcass between them, small but precious. Children rush forward, eyes wide, grunting with excitement. The elders lean closer, their cracked hands reaching to touch the prize. Around the fire, the butchering begins. Stone flakes glint in the glow, slicing through hide. Bones crack beneath hammerstones. Marrow drips onto eager fingers. But what fills the air is not only the smell of blood. It is the rhythm of voices. Grunts grow louder, sharper, triumphant. Hands wave in imitation of the chase. Bodies reenact the moment of capture. The hunters show the others how the prey ran, how it was cornered, how it fell. The children mimic the motions, stomping their feet, brandishing sticks. In these reenactments lies more than storytelling. It is practice, memory, and pride woven together. The hunt is celebrated, not just consumed. Here, the first seeds of ritual take root. The act of reliving the hunt, of sharing it with those who were not there, chase are honored, their courage recognized in gestures and sounds. Those who faltered may feel shame, remembered in silence or sharp glances. Over time, these unspoken judgments shape behavior. To be brave is to be respected. To be selfish is to be shunned. These are the first laws, not carved in stone, but written in memory. The pride of the hunt also nurtured something new: hope. Hunger had always been relentless, a shadow that returned every day. But now, each successful hunt promised that hunger could be beaten, even if only for a night. That promise gave the group resilience. They endured droughts and predators with a new conviction that tomorrow, together, they might succeed again. Even death found its place in this spirit of the hunt. When a hunter fell, trampled by prey or taken by predators, the group remembered. They imitated his last chase, grunted his sounds, mimed his gestures. In this way, memory stretched beyond the living. It was not immortality, but it was remembrance, the first flicker of honoring the dead. Modern humans still echo this instinct. We cheer victories together, retell them as stories, honor courage, and teach through reenactment. We celebrate meals not only as nourishment, but as meaning. Around sports fields, dinner tables, and campfires, we are still Homo Habilis, still living in the spirit of the hunt. The cooperative hunt was not just about killing prey. It was about creating identity. Each band of Homo Habilis became more than a collection of individuals. They became a tribe, defined by the hunts they dared, the risks they shared, the victories they remembered. In the flickering firelight, grease on their hands, voices raised in crude celebration, Homo habilis discovered something no predator ever knew: the joy of belonging. That joy, that bond, was as vital to survival as marrow or meat. It gave them strength not only to face the hunger of today, but to imagine the possibility of tomorrow. Predators were not the only threat on the savanna. Sometimes the most dangerous competition came from those who looked unsettlingly familiar. The world of Homo habilis was not empty of other hominins. For hundreds of thousands of years, they shared the land with relatives, creatures like Australopithecus, who had walked the earth before them, and perhaps even other early species now lost to time. These encounters were not always peaceful. Australopithecus was smaller, with brains less developed, but they still moved upright, still foraged, still competed for the same food. They too searched for berries, dug roots, and scavenged carcasses when the chance arose. For Homo habilis, this meant that survival was not just about avoiding lions and hyenas. It was about outsmarting rivals who wanted the same marrow-filled bones, the same patches of fruit, the same. But they are not alone. Across the bank, another group stands. Their bodies are smaller, their movements more primitive, but their eyes burn with the same hunger. They grunt, they bare their teeth, they throw stones into the water. For a moment, the two groups stare at each other, cousins divided by evolution, united by desperation. Sometimes the standoff ended without blood. One group backed away, searching for another waterhole. But not always. When resources grew scarce, competition turned violent. Stones became weapons, sticks swung with force, screams pierced the air. Blood spilled not from predator claws, but from the hands of kin-like rivals. For Homo habilis, these clashes were the first wars, not for conquest or territory, but for survival. Archaeological evidence suggests that such encounters were likely. Fossil sites reveal overlapping territories, bones marked by both stone tools and animal teeth. The record is silent on whether these confrontations ended in death or avoidance. But logic tells us, where food was scarce, conflict was inevitable. Yet these encounters also sharpened Homo habilis. To face rivals demanded more than strength. It demanded cunning. They learned to approach carcasses more cautiously, to guard waterholes more fiercely, to claim trees and shelters with more determination. They learned that survival was not just about enduring predators, but about defending themselves against creatures who thought and acted in ways uncomfortably close to their own. These rivalries shaped the very identity of Homo habilis. Against lions and leopards, they were prey. Against Australopithecus, they were competitors. And slowly, through these conflicts, Homo habilis proved themselves the more adaptable species. Their larger brains, their better tools, their growing cooperation gave them the edge. Over time, Australopithecus dwindled, fading into extinction, while Homo habilis endured. But victory came at a cost. Each confrontation etched fear and memory into their minds. Each fight reinforced the need for unity, for loyalty within the band. To survive a clash with rivals, they had to stand together. Betrayal or cowardice could not be tolerated. In this way, the pressure of competition forged stronger bonds within their own kind. Modern humans still carry this legacy. Our history is filled with rivalries between groups, tribes, nations. The instinct to defend resources, to protect kin, to distrust outsiders. These are echoes of encounters long ago, when Homo habilis stared across a river at their hominin cousins and felt both recognition and threat. For Homo habilis, these rivalries were another invisible predator, lurking in the background of their survival story. But unlike lions or hyenas, the attacked with claws, a crocodile with jaws, a hyena with crushing teeth. Against these enemies, Homo habilis knew what to expect. But rivals of their own kind, other bands of Homo habilis, or even remnants of Australopithecus, were far less predictable. They thought, they schemed, they remembered. And in these clashes, the survival of the cleverest, not just the strongest, was decided. Every confrontation was a test of unity. A band that worked together, keeping watch, guarding resources, protecting the young, had a chance. A band divided by fear or selfishness did not last long. Rival groups could steal food, drive them from shelters, or ambush them at waterholes. In this way, competition became a crucible, forcing Homo habilis to tighten their bonds, sharpen their skills, and strengthen their trust in one another. Tools became more important than ever. A sharpened stone was not only for butchering animals, but also for defending territory. A heavy hammerstone could be raised as a weapon in a standoff. Sticks, hardened by fire, doubled as spears. Violence between groups was not constant, but the possibility hung in the air, shaping their behavior. They carried their tools not just for survival against beasts, but for survival against their own kind. Yet rivalry was not always violent. Sometimes it was silent, a contest of endurance. Two groups might circle the same fruiting tree, one waiting for the other to leave. At a waterhole, one band might linger in the shadows while another drank, ready to rush forward as soon as the spot was free. Even in these quiet contests, tension was thick. Each group watching the other with suspicion, knowing that one misstep could turn patience into bloodshed. The pressure of rivalry had an unintended effect. It made Homo habilis smarter. Those who planned, who remembered, who cooperated more effectively, survived longer. Those who failed to adapt disappeared. Over generations, this selective pressure favored bigger brains, quicker thinking, and stronger bonds. The very existence of rivals pushed Homo habilis further along the path toward humanity. It also shaped their sense of identity. Inside the band, there was trust, loyalty, belonging. Outside the band, there was threat. The line between us and them was drawn in the dust of the savanna, long before nations or tribes ever existed. This was the dawn of in-groups and out-groups, of kinship and rivalry, instincts that still drive human behavior today. The memory of conflict lived in their gatherings. Around the fire, gestures and grunts retold clashes with rivals just as they retold hunts. Stories of victory built pride. Stories of loss carried warnings. The young learned not only how to face predators, but how to face strangers, cautiously, warily, always tools in shaping humanity. It was a constant reminder that survival was not guaranteed, that only the most adaptable bands could endure. Rivalry pushed Homo habilis to share more tightly within their groups, to innovate faster, to cooperate more deeply. And those instincts, sharpened in the pressure of conflict, became the foundation of everything that followed: tribes, societies, civilizations. So while the bones of predators still littered the plains, it was the bones of rivals that told another story, the story of competition among cousins, of survival won not by strength alone, but by unity, cunning, and resilience. For Homo habilis, rivalry was not just danger, it was opportunity. Each clash forced them to grow, to learn, to become more than they were. And in that crucible of competition, the first humans began to rise. For hundreds of thousands of years, Homo habilis endured on the African plains. They scavenged, hunted small game, gathered roots and berries, and learned to adapt in ways no creature before them ever had. But evolution never stood still. New challenges demanded new answers, and slowly, another figure began to rise on the horizon, a relative, taller, stronger, and far more capable. This was Homo erectus, the upright man, and their arrival marked the beginning of the end for Homo habilis. Homo erectus stood nearly as tall as modern humans, with longer legs built for endurance. Where habilis moved cautiously and awkwardly across the savanna, erectus could stride for miles, tracking herds, migrating with the seasons, covering distances their smaller cousins could never manage. Size alone gave them power. Predators thought twice before challenging them, and prey that once seemed untouchable now fell to their persistence. But it was not only their bodies that set them apart. Their brains were larger, averaging nearly twice the size of Homo habilis. With that expansion came new skills, sharper tools, and more complex strategies. The crude flakes of habilis gave way to carefully shaped hand axes, symmetrical and efficient, capable of cutting, chopping, and piercing with greater ease. Where habilis struck stones together and accepted whatever shards broke free, erectus planned their tools, shaping them with purpose. And then there was fire. While Homo habilis may have borrowed flames from lightning, Homo erectus learned to control it. Archaeological evidence suggests that they could maintain fire, perhaps even spark it themselves. This mastery changed everything. Fire cooked food, making meat easier to chew and digest, unlocking more energy for their growing brains. Fire hardened wooden spears, giving them deadlier weapons. Fire extended the day, creating hours of light and a group of erectus approaches. Taller, stronger, armed with better tools, they stride with confidence. Their eyes are sharper, their coordination tighter, their movements more deliberate. In such moments, habilis had little choice but to yield, retreating into the shadows as their cousins claimed the prize. The competition was not always direct. In some places, the ranges of habilis and erectus overlapped. In others, erectus spread into new lands, leaving habilis behind. But the pressure was constant. Wherever erectus thrived, habilis dwindled. The smaller, weaker species could not match their endurance, their tools, or their fire. Slowly, across thousands of years, Homo habilis was pushed aside, their place in the world shrinking as erectus spread outward from Africa, into Asia and beyond. Yet this was not simply extinction, it was transition. The innovations of Erectus did not erase Habilis, but built upon them. The first flakes of stone struck by trembling hands became the foundation for the hand-axes of Erectus. The scavenged fires of Habilis became the blazing hearths of their successors. Even as Habilis disappeared, their legacy lived on in the species that replaced them. In the great tapestry of evolution, Homo habilis was the spark, and Homo erectus was the flame. One had opened the door to human possibility. The other walked boldly through it. And in that passage, the world changed forever. Every species has its season. For Homo habilis, that season lasted nearly 1,000,000 years, longer than the entire history of our own civilization. They endured droughts, predators, and rivals. They crafted the first tools, dared the first hunts, gathered around the first flames. But time, relentless as the sun on the savanna, pushed them toward their end. The rise of Homo erectus brought a new order. Taller, stronger, smarter, Erectus spread across Africa and beyond, reaching lands that Habilis could never imagine. Their hand-axes split carcasses more efficiently. Their endurance hunts wore down prey too fast to catch by ambush. Their fire drove away predators and cooked their food. Against such innovation, Habilis struggled to keep pace. Imagine a watering hole at dusk. A small band of Habilis waits nervously at the edge, watching for crocodiles. Then a larger group of Erectus arrives. They move with confidence, standing taller, carrying spears hardened by fire. The Habilis shrink back, their smaller frames trembling, their crude flakes clutched tightly but uselessly. They drink quickly, glancing at the Erectus, then fade into the shadows. For them, survival now means avoidance. It was not one great battle that ended Homo habilis, but countless small defeats. Every time Erectus reached a carcass first, every time they drove Habilis from a shelter, every time their tools and fire. Yet their disappearance was not failure. In truth, Homo habilis had done what no species before them had managed. They had changed the game. They were the first to take stone and turn it into a tool. The first to scavenge marrow with intention, the first to sit in the glow of fire and find safety there. They were not conquerors, but pioneers. Without them, there would have been no Erectus, no Neanderthals, no us. Their legacy lives in every hand that grips a tool, in every fire that burns against the dark. It lives in our hunger for survival, in our instinct to share meals, in our need to speak and connect. Homo habilis may have vanished, but they remain within us, written into our DNA, echoed in our bones, remembered in the shards of stone they left behind. The sun set on Homo habilis more than 1,000,000 years ago. Their voices are silent, their shelters long gone, their fires extinguished. But their story endures. They were the first humans in spirit, if not in name, the ones who took the first fragile steps into the long road of humanity. As night fell on their final generations, perhaps they gathered as they always had, around a dwindling ember, children pressed close, elders watching the grass. They could not know that their kind was ending, but they had already given the world something greater than themselves, the beginning of us. Every great story begins with a gesture. For humanity, that gesture was the hand of Homo habilis closing around a stone. It was not the first hand to hold, not the first to grasp, but it was the first to shape, to strike, to imagine something more than what nature had given. That simple act, stone against stone, spark of sharpness, was the beginning of everything that followed. The hands of Homo habilis were unlike those of their ape cousins. Their thumbs sat forward, strong and dexterous, able to pinch and press with precision. Their fingers curled not only for climbing but for gripping and turning. With those hands, they unlocked possibilities hidden in the world around them. Rocks became blades, branches became spears, bones became hammers. In their hands, the savanna itself became a toolkit. Imagine one such hand, calloused and scarred, lifting a hammerstone. It strikes against a larger rock, the sound ringing across the plains. A flake breaks free, sharp as glass. The hand picks it up, tests its edge, slices a strip of meat. The gesture is clumsy, the cut uneven, but the meaning is profound. The world can be altered. The hand is not bound by instinct, it creates. From this moment flows a chain of invention stretching across 2 million years. Every knife, every plow, every sword, every wheel, every pen, every machine, all are descendants of that first flake. When we hold a smartphone, what danger in the grass, all of these acts were made possible by hands. They were instruments of trust, symbols of sharing. A hand extended was not only for grasping, but for giving. In this way, Homo Habilis wove the first threads of human society, one gesture at a time. Hands also gave voice to the voiceless. Before language, before words, gestures carried meaning. A raised palm meant stop, a finger pointing meant look. A hand waved in rhythm told a story in the firelight. In this way, hands became the first storytellers, bridging the silence between minds. The earliest culture was drawn not in cave paintings or carved idols, but in the living movement of hands beneath the stars. Even their failures were written in hands. Scarred knuckles, broken fingers, bones healed crookedly, all tell of struggles endured. A hand smashed against stone too hard. A hand bitten while scavenging. A hand burned while carrying fire. Each injury marked the cost of survival, yet still the hands reached again, lifted again, shaped again. Persistence was written in their very bones. Modern humans often take their hands for granted, but look at them now, flexible, strong, capable of both delicate touch and brutal force. They are living fossils, reminders of Habilis who first discovered what hands could do. When a child grasps a stick, when an artist sketches, when a builder lays stone upon stone, the echo of Habilis stirs again. The story of Homo Habilis is not just a tale of survival. It is the tale of hands daring to dream. They were not conquerors, not hunters of giants, not rulers of their world, but with their hands, they began the slow work of transformation. They changed the relationship between creature and environment. They planted the seed of a truth that still defines us. The world is not only endured, it can be shaped. And so, the legacy of Homo Habilis lives not in their bones, scattered and silent in the earth, but in every hand that moves today. In our gestures, our tools, our creations, we carry their story forward. Their season ended long ago, but their hands remain immortal, because they are our hands. 2 million years have passed since Homo Habilis walked the African plains. Their bones rest silent beneath the soil, their voices long gone, their fires extinguished. Yet their story has never ended. It continues in us, in every word we speak, every tool we craft, every community we build. Homo Habilis was not the strongest. They could not outrun predators, nor overpower prey. They had no mighty jaws, no claws, no armor. Their world, they endured it. They did not master nature, they adapted to it. Yet in those fragile victories they laid the foundation of humanity. Without them, there would be no Homo erectus, no Neanderthals, no Homo sapiens. Without them, there would be no us. Every survival story begins with risk. For Homo habilis, the risk was everything. To approach a carcass while predators lingered, to strike flint and risk a cut to the hand, to share food when hunger gnawed at every belly. These risks became choices, and those choices became culture. In this way, habilis stepped across the threshold from instinct to intention. They did not just live, they decided how to live. Modern humans carry their legacy in ways we scarcely notice. When we pass food across a table, we echo habilis sharing marrow around a fire. When we warn with a gesture, we echo their first signals in the grass. When we tell stories by light, whether of hunts, heroes, or hopes, we echo their reenactments in the flicker of flame. The roots of everything we call human, technology, language, society, run back to their time. We often celebrate the giants of history, the empires, the inventors, the explorers. But the true beginning of our story lies with a small, vulnerable species that dared to survive against impossible odds. They were not giants. They were not rulers. They were simply survivors. And in their survival, they lit the spark of humanity. So when you look at your hands, remember theirs. Scarred, clumsy, trembling, yet determined. When you sit by firelight, remember theirs, eyes wide with wonder, shadows dancing on their faces. When you speak, remember theirs, voices rough, gestures sharp, yet filled with meaning. Homo habilis is gone, but they are not forgotten. They walk with us still, in every tool we hold, every story we tell, every community we build. Their season ended, but their legacy began ours. The human story did not start with kingdoms or cities. It began with a spark struck from stone, with marrow shared in hunger, with fire carried through the night. It began with Homo habilis, the first to take the fragile step from survival to humanity. And so, as we reach for the stars, as we craft machines that touch worlds they could never imagine, we carry them with us, the first humans in spirit, if not in name, the first to say, in their own silent way, we are more than what the world makes us. We can make the world. This is the legacy of Homo habilis. This is the beginning of us.